Welcome back to Horror Vault channel. In this video, today I will be telling you 7 scariest yet true Valentine's Day horror stories that have happened with regular people like you and me. I would highly recommend you subscribing to Horror Vault if you haven't done, so that you will be the first one to get notification of our latest videos. Okay, without further delay, let's get to the first true Valentine's Day horror story. Story 1. The Valentine's Mystery. I used to love Valentine's Day. It was a day filled with joy, romance, and hope. As a teenager, I would marvel at the decorations in stores and dream about receiving a card from a secret admirer. My love for the holiday grew even stronger when I received my first anonymous Valentine's card at age 13. It was simple yet sweet. A pink card with a heart drawn in glitter and the words, "You're special." At that age, it felt magical. The cards kept coming every year, like clockwork. Each Valentine's Day, I would find one neatly placed in my mailbox or slipped under my door. The handwriting was always the same, elegant and precise, but there was never a name or clue about who sent them. My friends teased me about having a secret admirer, and for years, I believed it was someone close to me, maybe a classmate or even my mom trying to boost my confidence. By the time I turned 16, curiosity got the better of me. I confronted my mom about the cards, expecting her to laugh and admit it was her doing. Instead, she looked genuinely confused and swore she had nothing to do with it. I asked my siblings, my friends, even my teachers. No one claimed responsibility. The mystery deepened when I went off to college. That year, I had just moved into a new dorm room after a pipe burst in my original one. No one except my mom knew my new address. I hadn't even updated it with the campus mailroom yet. Yet on February 14th, there it was, a familiar pink envelope waiting for me on my desk. My heart raced as I opened it. The handwriting was identical to all the previous cards. "You're special." I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me after that. How did they know where I lived? Was someone watching me? My friends dismissed it as harmless fun, but something about it felt off. Years passed, and life moved on. I graduated college, got a job in marketing, and moved into my first apartment in the city. By then, I had almost forgotten about the cards, until they started showing up again. No matter how many times I moved or how carefully I kept my address private, the cards always found their way to me. At first, it seemed harmless, a nostalgic reminder of my teenage years. But as time went on, the messages began to change. They became more personal, more intimate. One year, the card read, "I miss seeing you smile." Another year, "You look beautiful when you wear blue." That one sent chills down my spine, because I had worn a blue dress to work just days before. I started feeling paranoid. Every time I walked down the street or sat in a cafe, I couldn't help but scan the faces around me, wondering if one of them belonged to my mysterious admirer. Then came Valentine's Day last year, the day everything changed. It was a cold February morning when I stepped out of my apartment building to head to work. As usual, there was a pink envelope waiting for me in my mailbox. My hands trembled as I opened it. This time, the message was different. "I'm closer than you think." My stomach churned as dread washed over me. Was this some kind of sick joke? Who would go to such lengths just to mess with me? Determined to get answers, I decided to install a security camera outside my apartment door. The next few weeks were uneventful. No cards, no unusual activity, until late at night on February 13th of this year. I had just finished watching a movie when my phone buzzed with an alert from the security camera app. Motion detected outside my door. My heart pounded as I opened the live feed. There he was, a man in his late 40s or early 50s wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. He crouched down and carefully placed a pink envelope against my door before looking directly into the camera lens. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow yet piercing. He smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that made my blood run cold, before disappearing into the shadows. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of his face haunted me every time I closed my eyes. Who was he? How long had he been watching me? And why? The next morning, Valentine's Day, I found myself staring at the pink envelope he had left behind. Part of me didn't want to open it, but curiosity won out. Inside was a single sentence. Tonight we'll finally be together. Panic set in as I called the police and showed them the footage from my camera. They assured me they would investigate, but warned that without knowing his identity or having evidence of criminal intent, there wasn't much they could do. That evening, as darkness fell over the city, I locked every door and window in my apartment and double-checked that all security measures were in place. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends checking in on me after hearing about what happened. Around midnight, just as I started to feel slightly calmer, there was a knock at my door. I froze. The knock came again, louder this time, and then again until it became an incessant pounding that echoed through the apartment. Gripping a kitchen knife tightly in one hand and my phone in the other, I crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Suddenly, all the lights in my apartment flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. My breath hitched as fear clawed at my chest. Fumbling for my phone flashlight, I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Before I could hit call, a voice whispered from somewhere inside the apartment, "You're special?" I screamed as adrenaline took over and ran out into the hallway without looking back. Neighbors peeked out of their doors as I banged frantically on someone's door for help until finally an elderly couple let me in and called the police. When officers arrived minutes later and searched my apartment, they found no sign of forced entry, no sign of anyone at all, except for one thing: another pink envelope sitting on my bed. This time it read, "See you soon." Since that night 2 weeks ago, I've been staying with friends while trying to piece together what happened and who he is, but every lead has turned into a dead end so far. All I know is that Valentine's Day will never feel magical again. Instead of love and joy, it now brings only fear, because somewhere out there is someone who thinks we're meant to be together, and he's not giving up anytime soon. That's the end of story number 1, and we will now move towards the next chilling story. Story 2, The Perfect Valentine. They called us the perfect couple. John and I have been married for 14 years, and from the outside, it must have seemed like a fairy tale. He was a successful obstetrician-gynecologist, charming, generous, and endlessly attentive. Our life together was filled with grand gestures, luxury vacations, expensive gifts, and even a Porsche on our wedding day. But as anyone who's lived through a marriage will tell you, appearances can be deceiving. I wasn't blind to John's flaws. He had a temper, nothing violent, but sharp enough to cut through the veneer of his otherwise loving demeanor. Still, I loved him deeply, or at least I thought I did. But as Valentine's Day 2001 approached, something shifted between us. It was subtle at first, a missed phone call here, an unusually late night at work there, and then I found the phone bill. Hundreds of calls to an unfamiliar number. When I dialed it, a woman answered, a dancer from one of those clubs downtown. My heart sank as she confirmed what I already suspected. John had been calling her for months. I confronted him that night, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt afraid of him. His face twisted in anger as he denied everything. But the evidence was undeniable. I told him I needed space to think about our future. He begged me to stay, promised me it would never happen again, but something inside me had already broken. For the first time in 14 years, I began to imagine my life without him. Valentine's Day arrived with a heavy sense of dread. John left early for surgery that morning, promising to come home during his lunch break so we could exchange gifts. I spent the morning pacing the house, trying to decide whether to tell him I wanted a divorce or wait until after the holiday. Around noon, I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart raced as he called out my name from downstairs. "Susan?" His voice echoed through the house. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood frozen in our bedroom, clutching the Valentine's card I'd written for him, but no longer felt like giving. "Susan?" His voice grew louder as he climbed the stairs. I stepped into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was instinct or maybe it was fear, but something told me not to face him just yet. "Susan," his footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. "Are you in there?" I didn't respond. The doorknob rattled violently. "Open the door." "John," I said finally, my voice shaking. "I need some time alone." "What are you talking about?" "It's Valentine's Day. Open this door right now." "I can't," I whispered. There was silence on the other side of the door for what felt like an eternity. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. The sharp crack of wood splintering as he slammed something heavy against the door. "John, stop!" I screamed, but he didn't stop. The blows came harder and faster until finally, the door gave way with a deafening crash. He stood there holding one of his cricket bats, his face red with fury. "You think you can lock me out?" he spat. "Please," I begged, backing away until my back hit the cold tile wall of the bathroom. "We can talk about this." "Oh, we'll talk," he said, tossing the bat aside and stepping toward me. Before I could react, his hands were around my throat. The world blurred as he squeezed tighter and tighter until darkness began to creep into my vision. In those final moments before everything went black, all I could think about was how wrong everyone had been about us, about him. We weren't perfect. We never were. When I woke up again or thought I did, it wasn't in this world anymore. It was dark and cold wherever I was now, a place that felt like an endless void where time didn't exist. And yet I wasn't alone. I could feel John's presence somewhere nearby. Not as a man, but as something else entirely, something monstrous and unrecognizable. He spoke to me in whispers that slithered through my mind like venom. "You're mine forever now." And no matter how far or fast I tried to run from him in this endless abyss, he always found me again. Even now, years later, I can still feel him watching from whatever shadowy corner of existence he's been banished to, waiting for his chance to drag me back into that darkness with him once more. So if you ever find yourself envying what looks like someone else's perfect life, remember this. Sometimes perfection is just another word for horror waiting to happen when no one else is looking. And sometimes love isn't love at all. It's possession disguised as devotion, a cage dressed up like paradise, a nightmare masquerading as a dream come true until it's too late to escape its clutches forevermore. And this is where story number 2 ends and next story begins. Story 3, The Dangerous Admirer. Valentine's Day has always been a mixed bag for me. Some years, it's been filled with romance and laughter, while others were marked by loneliness or awkward dates. But last year's Valentine's Day was different. It was a day I learned how quickly a seemingly innocent situation could spiral into a nightmare. It all started with an anonymous card. I found it on my desk at work, tucked neatly between my keyboard and monitor. The envelope was pink, and my name was written on it in elegant cursive. Intrigued, I opened it to find a short note. "Let's make this Valentine's Day special. Meet me tonight at 8 p.m. I'll pick you up." Below the message was an address, a house just a few blocks away from my apartment. At first, I thought it was from someone at work, maybe a secret admirer. My mind immediately went to Ryan, a guy from accounting who had been extra friendly lately. We'd exchanged smiles in the break room and chatted about movies once or twice. Could this be his way of asking me out? The idea made me smile. But as the day wore on, doubt began to creep in. Why hadn't Ryan just asked me directly? And why hadn't he signed his name? By lunchtime, curiosity had taken over. I decided to go to the address after work, just to see who it was. After all, what harm could there be in meeting someone who clearly admired me? When I arrived home that evening, I took extra care getting ready. I chose a simple red dress and light makeup. Nothing too fancy, but enough to show I cared. As the clock neared 8 p.m., my excitement grew. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. The address led me to a modest house on a quiet street. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately, and a man stood before me. He wasn't Ryan. "Hi," he said with an eager smile. "You must be Emily." I froze, caught off guard by his appearance. He was older than I expected, maybe in his late 40s, and there was something unsettling about his eyes. They were too wide, too intense, as if he were trying to read my every thought. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake," he said quickly. I sent the card. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. My stomach churned as unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I have to go," I said, stepping back toward the sidewalk. Before I could turn away, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Don't go yet." Panic surged through me as his grip tightened. "Let me go," I shouted, yanking my arm free. He took a step toward me, his expression darkening with anger. "You don't have to be afraid," he said through gritted teeth. "I just want to talk." I didn't wait to hear what else he had to say. Heart pounding, I turned and ran as fast as I could back to my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door and climb inside. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing in the middle of the street, watching me with an expression that sent chills down my spine. That night, sleep eluded me as my mind replayed the encounter over and over again. Who was this man? How did he know where I worked? And why had he chosen me? The next day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time someone walked past my desk or spoke my name, I jumped in my seat. By lunchtime, I decided to tell my boss about what had happened. When I mentioned the man's name, Mason, my boss's face went pale. "Mason," he repeated slowly. "He used to work here, briefly." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "He was hired as a janitor last month, but didn't last more than a week," my boss explained. "There were issues." "What kind of issues?" My boss hesitated before answering. "Let's just say he made some of the staff uncomfortable." I felt sick to my stomach as everything clicked into place. Mason must have seen me at work and fixated on me without my knowledge. The thought made my skin crawl. "I'm going to call security," my boss said firmly. "We'll make sure he doesn't come near this building again." For a while, things seemed to settle down. Mason didn't show up at work or contact me again, or so I thought. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work late one evening, I noticed something strange. A car parked across the street with its headlights off but engine running. My heart raced as I walked briskly toward my own car, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. When I reached home that night, there was another card waiting for me in my mailbox, a pink envelope identical to the first one. This time, the message inside sent shivers down my spine. "You can't ignore me forever." I called the police immediately and filed a report. But there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Over the next few days, more cards arrived, each one more disturbing than the last. "You look beautiful today. I know where you live. We're meant to be together." I started seeing Mason everywhere, in grocery stores, outside coffee shops, even parked near my apartment late at night. Each time our eyes met, he would smile that same unsettling smile from our first encounter. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold as dread settled over me like a suffocating fog. Slowly pushing the door open wider with trembling hands revealed nothing out of place at first glance. But then something caught my eye. Another pink envelope sitting neatly on my coffee table. This time there was no note inside, just a single photograph of me, taken through what looked like my bedroom window while I slept. That night marked the beginning of months filled with fear and paranoia. A constant battle against an invisible threat lurking just beyond reach, but always present nonetheless. This is the end of story number 3, and now we begin the next story in this series. Story 4, The Last Dance. It was February 12th, 1971. A night I had been looking forward to for weeks. Jesse and I were going to the Valentine's Day dance at Watts Hospital. It was a rare chance for us to escape the pressures of school and just enjoy each other's company. Jesse had been my high school sweetheart, and even though we'd hit a few bumps lately, he'd given me a pre-engagement ring not long ago. That small circle of gold on my finger felt like a promise, a reminder that whatever came our way, we would face it together. I remember how handsome he looked that night, his dark hair neatly combed, his smile easy and confident. He picked me up from my dorm at Watts Hospital in his brother Marty's Ford Cortina. As I signed out, promising to be back by the 1 a.m. curfew, my friends teased me about how lucky I was to have someone like Jesse. And I was lucky. So lucky that I didn't notice the shadow lingering near the dormitory parking lot, or the faint feeling of unease that prickled at the back of my neck. The dance was magical. The hospital's gymnasium was decked out in pink and red streamers, with heart-shaped balloons floating lazily above us. Jesse twirled me around the floor, his laughter infectious as we stumbled through a fast-paced number. For a while, it felt like nothing else mattered. Not school, not our recent arguments, not even the strange sensation that someone was watching us. After our last dance around 11:30 p.m., we decided to take a drive before heading back to the dorm. Jesse suggested we go to Wayside Place, a quiet lover's lane where couples often went to talk or steal a few private moments. It wasn't far from campus, and with curfew looming, it seemed like the perfect way to end our evening. The road to Wayside Place was dark and winding, lined with skeletal trees that seemed to reach out toward us as we passed. When we arrived, Jesse parked in one of the secluded spots near the edge of the woods. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty space and tangled underbrush. We sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing. Jesse held my hand, his thumb tracing lazy circles over my knuckles. "You know," he said softly, "I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore." I smiled at him, but before I could respond, there was a sharp knock on Jesse's window. We both jumped. A man stood outside in the shadows, his face obscured by darkness, but his posture rigid and imposing. He gestured for Jesse to roll down the window. "Is there a problem?" Jesse asked cautiously as he complied. The man flashed what looked like a badge, though in hindsight, it could have been anything. "You're trespassing," he said curtly. "Step out of the car." Jesse hesitated, but eventually opened his door and got out. I followed suit, clutching my coat tightly around me as the cold night air bit at my skin. "Is this really necessary?" Jesse asked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for us to follow him toward another vehicle parked just beyond the tree line, a dark sedan with its engine idling softly. My stomach twisted into knots as we walked deeper into the woods. "Where are we going?" I asked nervously. "Just keep moving," the man snapped. As we neared the sedan, another figure emerged from behind it, a second man whose face was partially obscured by a hooded jacket. My heart pounded in my chest as they forced us into their car and drove further into the forest. The ride felt endless. The two men didn't speak much. Their silence was more terrifying than any threats they could have made. Jesse kept glancing at me, his eyes filled with worry but also determination. He squeezed my hand tightly as if to say, "I'll protect you." Eventually, they stopped in an isolated clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in around us like prison bars. They ordered us out of the car and marched us down a narrow path littered with dead leaves and patches of reddish mud. "Please," I begged them, "just let us go." But they ignored me. At some point along the trail, they produced ropes, thick hemp cords that smelled faintly of mildew, and began binding our hands behind our backs. My breath hitched as one of them looped another rope around my neck and tightened it just enough to make breathing difficult but not impossible. Jesse struggled against his captor, shouting at them to leave me alone. But his defiance only earned him a brutal punch to the stomach that left him gasping for air. They tied us back to back against a large tree trunk, using more rope to secure our bodies in place. The bark scraped against my skin through my dress as I squirmed helplessly against my bindings. And then came the worst part, the torture. The ropes around our necks were their instruments of cruelty. They would tighten them slowly until we were on the verge of passing out before loosening them just enough for us to gasp for air. This cycle repeated over and over again, a sadistic game designed to prolong our suffering. At one point during this nightmare, I could hear Jesse whispering words of comfort despite his own pain. "We'll get through this, stay strong." But deep down, I think we both knew there would be no escape. The men took turns taunting us, mocking our fear and reveling in our agony. One of them even jabbed at Jesse's chest with what felt like an ice pick or screwdriver after he had already lost consciousness from strangulation. When it was finally over, when their sick game had run its course, they left us there beneath a shroud of leaves and debris as if trying to erase any trace of what they had done. I don't know how long it took for death to claim me. Minutes? Hours? Time lost all meaning in those final moments when all that remained was pain and silence and darkness. But even now, decades later, I can still feel their hands on me, still hear their laughter echoing through those cursed woods, still see flashes of moonlight filtering through twisted branches above as life slipped away from me forever. And sometimes on cold February nights when lovers dance beneath starlit skies, I wonder if anyone remembers what happened here, or if we've been forgotten entirely, just another unsolved mystery buried beneath layers upon layers of time. All I know is this: love brought us together that night, but evil tore us apart, and somewhere out there our killers still walk free, waiting, watching, hunting for their next victims. This story is inspired by true events but remains fictionalized for dramatic purposes based on available details surrounding Patricia Mann and Jesse McBain's unsolved murders. This is the end of story number 4, and next story begins now. Story 5. The Valentine's Day Nightmare. It was supposed to be a new beginning. After months of solitude, I decided to give online dating a chance. That's how I met Josh. His profile was charming. He was a lawyer, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. When he suggested we meet for Valentine's Day at his cabin in the woods, I hesitated at first, but his warmth and confidence won me over. He assured me it would be a romantic evening with dinner and stargazing. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That Valentine's Day evening, I arrived at the cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cabin was picturesque, nestled deep in the woods, with smoke curling from its chimney. Before stepping out of my car, I texted my best friend Megan, letting her know I had arrived. She had insisted on sharing my location and made me promise to check in every hour. Josh opened the door almost immediately after I knocked. He was even more attractive in person, tall, with a warm smile that put me at ease. The interior of the cabin was cozy, with a crackling fire and a beautifully set dining table adorned with candles and flowers. It felt like something out of a romance movie. Dinner was perfect. Josh had cooked an incredible meal: steak, roasted vegetables, and a decadent chocolate dessert. We talked for hours about our lives, dreams, and favorite memories. He seemed attentive and kind, hanging on to every word I said. I updated Megan every hour as promised, telling her how well the evening was going. After dinner, Josh suggested we take a walk in the woods to enjoy the crisp night air and look at the stars. At first, I hesitated. It was dark and cold, but he reassured me it would be safe and romantic. His enthusiasm was infectious, so I agreed. As we walked deeper into the forest, the trees loomed tall around us, their branches forming eerie shadows in the moonlight. Josh held my hand tightly, guiding me along the narrow path. Megan texted me again, asking why my location showed I was moving into the woods. I laughed it off and sent her some emojis to assure her everything was fine. We reached a clearing where Josh had set up a picnic blanket under the stars. There was a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket, and 2 glasses waiting for us. It was breathtakingly beautiful. The snow-covered mountains in the distance glowed under the moonlight. "This is amazing," I said as he poured us both glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I took a sip of my champagne while we talked about everything from our favorite books to childhood memories. But as time passed, something began to feel off. His gaze lingered on me too long. His smile seemed forced. Then I noticed it. A camera mounted on a tripod just beyond the blanket, pointed directly at us. "What's that for?" I asked nervously. Josh chuckled softly. "Just wanted to capture this special moment." His answer didn't sit well with me, but I tried to brush it off as paranoia. After all, he had gone through so much trouble to plan this evening. But then it happened. As I reached for my phone to text Megan again, dizziness washed over me like a wave. My vision blurred. My limbs felt heavy as if they were weighed down by lead. "Josh," I managed to whisper before collapsing onto the blanket. When I woke up, my head throbbed painfully. The room spun around me as I tried to make sense of where I was. My hands were tied behind my back with coarse rope that bit into my skin. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was back inside the cabin. Josh stood across the room, his demeanor completely different from before. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something cold and calculating. "You're awake," he said casually as if this were all perfectly normal. "Why are you doing this?" My voice trembled with fear. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You're special," he said simply. I knew it from the moment we matched. Tears streamed down my face as he approached me slowly. "Please just let me go." He crouched down beside me and brushed a strand of hair from my face with chilling tenderness. "Don't cry," he whispered. "This is all part of our story." I struggled against the ropes, but only succeeded in bruising my wrists further. My heart raced as he retrieved something from behind him, a syringe filled with an unknown liquid. "No!" I screamed, thrashing wildly as he tried to grab my arm. At that moment, there was a loud banging on the cabin door, followed by Megan's voice shouting my name. Josh froze for a split second before snarling under his breath. He grabbed me roughly by the arm and dragged me toward another room, just as Megan burst through the door with 2 police officers behind her. "Let her go!" Megan screamed when she saw us. The officers drew their weapons and ordered Josh to release me immediately. For a moment, it seemed like he might comply, but then he lunged toward one of them with the syringe still in hand. The next few moments were chaotic, a blur of shouting voices and scuffling bodies. But eventually Josh was subdued and handcuffed while one officer untied me from my restraints. In the days that followed, I learned just how close I had come to becoming another statistic in an unspeakable crime spree orchestrated by Josh, or whatever his real name was, since everything about him turned out to be fake. His career, his background, even his name wasn't real. Megan had saved my life by trusting her instincts when she noticed something strange about my location updates that night. And for that, I will be forever grateful. But even now, years later, the memory of that Valentine's Day haunts me every time February rolls around, reminding me how easily trust can turn into terror when you least expect it. That's the end of story number 5, and we now move towards story number 6. Story 6. The Anonymous Valentine. It started when I was 13. I remember the day vividly. February 14th. A day I had been dreading. Middle school wasn't kind to me, and Valentine's Day only served as a reminder of how invisible I felt. But that year, something unusual happened. Among the usual pile of junk mail and bills on the kitchen counter, there was an envelope addressed to me. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a Valentine's Day card. It was simple, pink with a heart on the front, and inside it read, "You're special. Happy Valentine's Day." At first, I thought it was from my mom. She had always been my biggest cheerleader, and it seemed like something she would do to boost my spirits. But when I asked her about it, She looked genuinely surprised. "It wasn't me," she said with a smile. "Maybe you have a secret admirer." I laughed it off, but the thought lingered in my mind. Who could it have been? A friend? A classmate? The idea of having a secret admirer was thrilling, and for the rest of that day, I walked around with a little more confidence. The next year, another card arrived. Same handwriting, same lack of return address. This time, the message read, "Thinking of you today." By now, I was convinced it was someone close to me, maybe a friend playing a prank or someone too shy to confess their feelings. But no one ever admitted to sending them. As the years went by, the cards kept coming. Every February 14th, without fail, an anonymous Valentine would appear in my mailbox. The messages were always sweet and simple. "You're loved," or "Hope your day is as wonderful as you are." It became something I looked forward to, a small mystery that added excitement to an otherwise ordinary day. But things started to change when I turned 16. That year, I had moved into a new house with my family after a pipe burst in our old one. We hadn't told many people about the move yet. Only close family and friends knew our new address. So when the Valentine's card arrived at our new house, same handwriting, same style, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mom," I said hesitantly as I showed her the card, "are you sure this isn't you?" She shook her head firmly. "I promise it's not me." I pressed her further, but she insisted she had no idea who could have sent it. My dad didn't know either. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the card on my nightstand, unease began to creep in where excitement used to be. By the time I went to college, I had almost forgotten about the cards. My life was busy with classes, friends, and part-time jobs. But on February 14th of my freshman year, there was waiting for me in my dorm mailbox. This time it read, "No matter where you go, I'll always find you." I froze when I read those words. It didn't feel sweet or romantic anymore. It felt like a threat. How did they know where I lived? My dorm address wasn't public knowledge. Only close friends and family knew where to find me. I called my mom immediately. "It came again," I said breathlessly over the phone. "What did it say?" she asked. When I told her, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Maybe it's time to go to the police," she finally said. But what would I tell them? That someone had been sending me Valentine's cards for years? There was no crime in that. Not yet anyway. The cards kept coming every year without fail. No matter where I moved, to different dorms, apartments after graduation, even across state lines, they always found me. By now, they had stopped feeling like tokens of affection, and more like reminders that someone out there was watching me closely. One year, when I was 25 and living alone in a small apartment downtown, things escalated. It was February 14th again, a day I had come to dread more than any other. As expected, there was an envelope waiting for me in my mailbox when I got home from work. But this time, instead of just a card inside, there was also a photograph. It was a picture of me taken from outside my apartment window. My heart raced as I stared at the image. In it, I was sitting on my couch watching TV, completely unaware that someone had been standing outside in the darkness with a camera pointed at me. The message inside the card read, "You looked beautiful last night." I locked all my doors and windows immediately and called the police. They took the card and photo as evidence, but admitted there wasn't much they could do without knowing who sent them or catching them in the act. For weeks after that incident, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of floorboards or rustle outside made my skin crawl. Eventually, though, when no more cards arrived, I convinced myself that whoever was had finally stopped. But then last year happened. I had moved again, this time to another city entirely, and taken every precaution to keep my address private. Only my landlord and employer knew where I lived now. Even my closest friends didn't have my exact location unless they visited in person. Yet somehow, on February 14th, another card appeared in my mailbox. This one simply said, "You can't hide from me. Now it's February 6th, just days away from Valentine's Day, and dread has settled over me like a heavy fog. Every shadow outside looks like someone lurking. Every knock at the door makes my heart pound uncontrollably. I don't know who they are or what they want, but one thing is clear. This isn't love anymore, if it ever was at all. This is obsession, and it terrifies me more than anything else ever has. As Valentine's Day approaches once again, all I can do is wait, and hope this year doesn't bring something worse than just another card. This is where Story 6 ends, and we will now begin the last story of this video. Story 7. The Flames of Obsession. I never thought it would end like this. When I first met her, I was captivated. Her name was Emily, and she had a way of making you feel like the center of the universe. Her laughter was infectious, her smile magnetic. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment we locked eyes, it felt like fate. She was everything I thought I wanted, until she wasn't. At first, things were perfect. Emily was attentive, affectionate, and always eager to spend time together. But as the months passed, her love began to feel suffocating. She wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was with, and what I was doing. If I didn't respond to her texts immediately, she flooded my phone with messages, each one more frantic than the last. "I just love you so much," she'd say when I confronted her about it. "I don't want to lose you." Her intensity scared me, but I convinced myself it was just passion. Maybe she'd been hurt before. Maybe she just needed reassurance. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The breaking point came on Valentine's Day. We had planned a quiet evening at my apartment, dinner, a movie, nothing fancy. But when Emily arrived, she was carrying a small box wrapped in red paper with a black ribbon tied around it. "Happy Valentine's Day," she said with a wide smile. I opened the box to find a silver locket inside. It was beautiful, ornate, and antique looking, but there was something unsettling about it. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of us together that I didn't even remember taking. "Where did you get this picture?" I asked. "I took it while you were sleeping," she said casually. Her answer sent a shiver down my spine. "Who does that?" But instead of saying anything, I forced a smile and thanked her for the gift. The rest of the evening felt tense, her eyes constantly watching me as if waiting for some unspoken reaction. That night, after she left, I made up my mind. I couldn't do this anymore. Breaking up with Emily wasn't easy. She cried, begged me to reconsider, and even showed up at my apartment unannounced several times in the weeks that followed. Each time, she'd bring gifts, flowers, chocolates, handwritten letters professing her love. "I can change," she'd plead through tears. "Just give me another chance." But my mind was made up. As much as it hurt to see her like that, I knew staying with her would only make things worse, for both of us. Eventually, she seemed to accept it, or so I thought. A few months later, life started to feel normal again. Emily stopped calling and texting. The random visits ceased. I even started seeing someone new, a co-worker named Rachel who was kind and easygoing in all the ways Emily wasn't. But then February rolled around again. It started with small things. Anonymous notes left on my car windshield that read "You're mine" or "We belong together." At first, I thought they were pranks, maybe from some bored teenagers in the neighborhood. But then Rachel received one too. "Who's Emily?" she asked one night after finding a note taped to her apartment door. My blood ran cold as I read the message. "Stay away from him." I tried to brush it off as nothing, just some crazy coincidence, but Rachel wasn't convinced. "This isn't normal," she said firmly. "You need to talk to someone about this." She was right. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report, but without concrete proof that Emily was behind the notes or any evidence of direct threats. They couldn't do much beyond taking my statement. On Valentine's Day itself, things escalated. I came home from work late that evening to find my apartment filled with smoke. The fire alarm blared as flames licked at the walls of my living room. Panicked neighbors stood outside in their pajamas, while firefighters worked frantically to contain the blaze. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but my apartment was destroyed. The fire marshal later determined that faulty wiring had caused the blaze, a freak accident unrelated to any foul play. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily had something to do with it. Then came the message that confirmed my worst fears. An email sent from an anonymous account with no subject line and only 3 words in the body. Burning together forever. I moved out of town shortly after that, changed jobs, changed numbers, even deleted all my social media accounts in an attempt to disappear completely. For a while, it worked. Months turned into years without any sign of Emily or her obsession until last week. It's been 5 years since that Valentine's Day fire. And yet here I am again, staring at another anonymous email sitting in my inbox. You can't run forever. The message is short but chilling. A reminder that no matter how far I go or how much time passes, she'll always find me. And now, as February 14th approaches once more, all I can do is wait, wondering if this will be the year she finally makes good on her promise. That's the end of this video, guys. What do you think about all these true horror stories of Valentine's Day? Let us know your opinion in the comments box, and don't forget to subscribe to Horror Vault to continue watching such interesting true stories regularly. I will see you in the next video.